Magnus Carlsen is ridiculously good at chess, and it's gotten to the point, it's actually been to the point for quite a while, where he can afford to have some fun. He can troll his opponents with weird opening moves, or with queen sacrifices that are not even necessary, as you're about to see in this absolutely insane game from this most recent Titled Tuesday that we're about to look at. After a far from obvious opening misstep on move 10 by his 3,000 rated Grandmaster opponent David Paravian, Magnus Carlsen executes an incredible, engine-perfect 7-move forcing sequence culminating in a brutal queen sacrifice that he didn't even need to play. All it did was create needless complications that no human could properly evaluate without relying on a world-class level of positional intuition. So you're going to love this one. It's an absolute masterpiece. It's got everything you want, including a ravishing checkmate by force without the help of the queen to round out the game. So let's dive right in. David Paravian is playing white, and he opens this instant classic with the move c4. Magnus responds with my favorite way to meet the English opening, e5, grabbing him some of that center, avoiding symmetry. This is how you play for a win as black. Next is knight to c3, and now bishop to b4. A move with which Magnus asks, will you allow me to damage your queenside pawn structure with bishop takes c3? David says, no, I will not, as he plays queen to c2, preparing to recapture with the queen if and when the knight is taken. Magnus continues with a rather obscure move now, a5. It's not a popular move, but Magnus has played it before, and it does serve a very concrete purpose, which becomes apparent after David's next move, knight to f3, attacking the e5 pawn, which Magnus has decided he's going to defend with the move d6. And if you're wondering, why not knight to c6 instead, developing a piece? Well, Magnus is actually planning on playing knight to a6, headed for the very nice outpost on c5. Now, if a5 had not been played here, then white could gain an advantage with knight to d5, hitting the bishop, and if bishop to c5, he'd have the space-gaining b4 defended by the knight. But here, with the pawn on a5 covering that square, b4 would of course just lose the pawn. In the game, David does not play knight to d5, but instead goes for e3, which you might think is in preparation for the move d4, as I did, but after knight to f6 from Magnus, we see that David's plan is actually to play bishop to d3, blocking his d-pawn, which looks a bit odd and rather amateurish. White is now trained on h7 with the queen and bishop battery, but black has yet to castle, and that pawn is well defended. David is an elite player though, so you know he's not going to play this without some kind of a plan, and because that plan is going to involve the move knight to d5, best for black in this position is to just eliminate that knight now with bishop takes c3. If in Stockfish we place our full faith and trust. Magnus just goes ahead with his knight to a6 though, after which we do have knight to d5, looking to eliminate one defender of the h7 pawn with knight takes f6 check, although it's probably not going to be any good for white to capture that pawn until after black castles, since if bishop takes h7 doesn't come with check, then black will win material with g6, trapping the bishop. Assuming that white captures the knight on f6, when the recapture queen takes f6 will adequately defend the g6 square. But after Magnus's next move, knight to d7, bishop takes h7 has suddenly become a bit more playable, with the prospect of answering g6 with bishop takes g6, grabbing 3 pawns for the sacrificed piece. White would actually be winning in that case, which is why black should instead respond to bishop takes h7 with the move c6, when black would be the preferred side, for reasons that are a bit too engine-y for our purposes here. Now I should probably point out that taking the bishop on b4 would be very bad in view of knight takes b4, forking queen and bishop, followed by moves like knight to c5 and e4, honing in on that d3 square, and I'll let your imagination take it from there. What David plays is the much superior a3, attacking the bishop on b4, which Magnus doesn't really want to put on c5. He wants to reserve that square for a knight. So what does he do? He counterattacks with c6. David responds with the top engine move, knight takes bishop, but after a takes b4, here on move 10, he commits a losing blunder by capturing the pawn on h7. Apparently he feels he can get away with this now, and I can't say I blame him because looking at the position, would you believe that white is totally busted here if you were playing as black? And if so, how would you proceed? How does one punish this greedy pawn grab? Magnus is about to show us the way with an unbelievable sequence of ruthlessly precise moves. Hold on to your hat and anything else you value, because this is about to get nuts. Magnus begins by playing b3, attacking the queen. Okay, she's got to keep defending the bishop, so David plays queen to b1. Looks safe enough. Next is knight to f6. The bishop is now attacked twice. It must move. Not a lot of options. If bishop to f5, then black will trade bishops, play e4 with tempo on the f3 knight, followed by knight to c5, looking to come into d3 next. That's no road to redemption for white. So what's played in the game is bishop to d3, but now comes knight to c5, and with it, the threat of knight takes d3, queen takes d3, and then e4, forking queen and knight. David retreats his bishop to e2, saying to Magnus, "What do you got?" "I got an extra pawn." Of course, I have no idea what was really going through his head, but I do wonder at what point he began to realize that he's in big trouble. The engine is already giving over 3 pawns in black's favor here, if you can believe that. But if I had this position as white, especially in a blitz game, I would probably think, okay, I'm under a bit of pressure, my position's slightly passive, but I do have the extra pawn, and so it's anyone's game. And against the lesser opponent, that might even be a realistic outlook, but against Magnus, it's totally delusional, as you're about to see. Magnus continues e4, attacking the f3 knight. It goes to d4, and now we have a very nice move, knight to g4, attacking h2 with 2 pieces, while simultaneously threatening knight to e5, when both black's knights will be converging on that gaping hole in white's position on d3. Probably realizing this, David now goes into crisis mode, at least that's what I'm calling it, with the move f3. After which Magnus can win with almost anything. Just pick your favorite move, and it's probably winning. Knight takes h2 is winning, rook takes h2 is winning, knight to e5 is still winning, although after f takes e4, at least there's no knight to d3. But David is about to realize that he's got bigger fish to fry than a knight getting into d3 now, after Magnus's next move, queen to h4 check. Black's only got 3 legal replies. King to f1, of course, allows queen to f2 checkmate. King to d1 runs into a pretty little smothered mate in 4 moves. Pause the video if you want to work that one out on your own. So the move played in the game, g3, is about as forced as a move can be, and it leaves both black's queen and knight under attack by a pawn. So what to do? Is it time to panic? What would you do as black in this situation? It's actually pretty easy not to mess this up. White's position is getting so bad that black can just let the knight go with something as simple as queen to h5. This is not what Magnus plays, but you really got to see how crushing this is in order to fully appreciate the move that he does play. Okay, so if pawn takes knight on g4 and the bishop recaptures, now black's threatening to eliminate white's defender of the d3 square, where he would of course like to invade with his knight. Trying to avoid the trade with bishop to f1 will fail very quickly to bishop to f3, hitting the rook, which one way or another will have to abandon the defense of the h2 pawn. If knight takes f3, then there's queen takes f3, hitting the rook again, and if it moves, then rook takes h2 is actually a forced mate in 5. But even if white had traded off the light squared bishops and allowed the knight into d3 without being captured, black wouldn't even have to play that. His knight could just hang out here on c5 defending these 2 pawns, which are completely negating 3 of white's pieces. His rook on a1, his queen, and his dark squared bishop are all imprisoned, and will have no moves as long as these 2 black pawns are keeping the queen side on lockdown. So I just wanted to show you how low risk and easily winning this variation is for black, so that when you see what Magnus plays in the game, which in this position, after the move g3, is the incredible queen takes g3 check, sacrificing the queen, you'll have a deeper appreciation of just how savage and totally uncompromising this move is. Okay, so first of all, white has to accept the sacrifice, since his only alternative is to move the king to f1 or d1, both of which would still run into checkmate by force. If king to f1, then queen to f2 is checkmate. And I'll just quickly show you what happens after king to d1, because it is very pretty. The checkmate in 4 goes as follows: knight to f2 check, king to e1, knight to d3 check, king to d1, queen to e1 check, rook takes e1, after which knight to f2 is checkmate. So in the game, David of course accepts the sacrificed queen with h takes g3. This allows the rook on h1 to be captured with check. White can only block with the bishop, which Magnus now attacks with knight to h2. The bishop's pinned to the king, so it can't move. David plays king to f2, so that after rook takes f1 check, he's got king to g2, attacking the knight, which cannot escape without allowing king takes rook on f1. But even if knight takes f3 is played here, just giving up the rook, the engine is still saying that white is totally lost. That's how miserable white's position has become. Magnus plays e takes f3 with check, after which David doesn't even take the knight on h2, since if he did, like so, there'd be bishop to g4, defending the pawn, followed by rook to e1 or d1, threatening to push that pawn, which white can only prevent by sacrificing his knight. This is why, in the game, David decides to remove that pawn right away with knight takes f3. Magnus responds rook takes f3. His rook is still defended. David is now able to get his queen active with queen to h7 as a result of Magnus having traded off his pawn that was on e4. Next we have rook to f6, getting his rook out of danger, and so now threatening to do the same with his knight since it no longer needs to defend his rook on f3. And this is a good tactical moment. What do you think white should play here? Feel free to pause the video and then leave your answer in the comments. Hopefully you didn't say king takes h2, since that would lose the queen to rook to h6 check. But what's much less obvious is that white shouldn't play queen takes h2 either, as this runs into trouble after rook to h6 attacking the queen, who can only retreat to g1. And I'll just show you the top engine line real quick. It goes bishop to h3 check, king to f2, rook to f6 check, king to e1, knight to d3 check, king to e2, knight to e5, threatening bishop to g4 check followed by knight to d3, when at the end of the day, it seems that white is either getting checkmated or losing his queen. For example, after d4 to give the king a square on d2, we have bishop to g4 check, forcing the king to e1 or d2, after which knight to f3 check picks up the queen. So pretty remarkable that David was able to foresee this and avoid it in a blitz game, where in this position, after rook to f6, instead of capturing the knight, he plays the much better, though still losing move, d4, counterattacking the knight on c5. Now Magnus could just retreat the knight to e6 here and be totally winning, but he plays a stronger move, bishop to f5, counterattacking the white queen. Again, queen takes h2 is no good and will fail to bishop to e4 check, followed by rook to h6, converging on the h1 square. And then once the knight gets involved, white will again have to choose between giving up his queen and getting checkmated. So just to give you an example of what happens if the queen is not around to sacrifice herself, we can take a look at the move that I probably would have played in this position, queen to h8 check, going after the undefended rook on a8. But after king to e7 and queen takes a8, black actually has a checkmate in 7, which is why David avoided this. But I'll show it to you in high speed here, just in case anyone wants to actually see it on the board. It's quite lovely and ends with rook to h1 checkmate. But in the game, after bishop to f5, we have queen takes g7, attacking the rook on f6. Magnus plays bishop to e4 check. We now have king takes knight, which brings us to an unfortunate yet very instructive moment where Magnus Carlsen makes his only significant error of this entire game, failing to find black's only winning move in this position. Pause the video and see if you can spot it. Black's only good way to get his rook out of danger is to play rook to f1, threatening checkmate on h1. This will force white to either give up material or to play the move g4 to give his king a square, after which the attacked knight on c5 can retreat to e6, ready to go to f8 to block a check by the white queen, after which black can castle and go on to win the game. Magnus blunders though with the move king to e7, just defending the rook. What could be more natural? Well, this move actually loses to pawn takes knight on c5, which for some reason David rejects, playing g4 instead, giving his king a square on g3, which is not necessary until rook to f1 is actually played, threatening checkmate on h1. So this gives Magnus the chance to get his knight out of danger. An immediate knight to e6 or knight to d3 is the most crushing, but he plays rook to g6 first, which is also winning, attacking the queen, which goes to h7. We have knight to d3, preparing to set up a mating net with the two minor pieces in rook. David plays d5, presumably to restrict the black king. I guess he wants to prevent any king to e6 in response to queen to h4 check, which white should have played right away, although it wouldn't have saved him since black could just play king to d7 and then double his rooks on the g file, with the end drawing very nigh. But here in the game, Magnus is able to play rook takes g4 with a discovered attack by the bishop on the queen, who no longer has any good check, and so moves to h5, giving Magnus a forced checkmate in 6 moves, which he goes about executing flawlessly, with rook to g2 check, king to h3, knight to f2 check, king to h4, and after rook to h2 check, David Paravian loses the game on time. If play were to continue, black would checkmate in another 3 moves with king to g3, rook to g8 check, queen to g4, rook takes g4 check, king takes h2, and rook to g2 checkmate. Simply beautiful. You just don't get a much prettier coordination of 3 pieces than that. And what an incredible game. Let me know what you thought of it. This just could be the Blitz game of the year. How Magnus is able to get away with sacrificing his queen like this so often is really hard to fathom. He makes it look like child's play, but that's because he only goes for queen sacrifices that actually work, as opposed to ones that look like they might work but don't quite work. How he is able to tell the difference in a Blitz game is truly insane and ridiculous and a wonder to behold. But that's it for now. Smash that like button if you like anything related to this video or to anything else. Consider subscribing to the channel if you want the very best games of both past and present brought to you on a regular basis. Feel free to leave a comment with anything that's on your mind, and I will see you soon.